Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, everybody. Let me just start by welcoming you to this regional workshop for FDI. This is the first time we are organizing such a workshop. The overall objective and the aspiration of this workshop is to unify, harmonize the thinking, and especially the future thinking of FDI role and objective to achieve the economic development of the GCC countries. And everybody knows to what extent crucial role that's the FDI play in development of the countries, and to what extent contribute to raise the standard of living of the people of GCC countries and Bahrain specific. I would like to welcome our distinguished colleagues from UNCTAD, Mr. Masaka Fijita and Mr. Astres, who are specialized in FDI, not only in terms of gathering the information, but in terms of how you put these figures and data in the context of achieving the country ultimate aims of growth and standard living of their citizen. This workshop aim and objective is more technical. It will introduce you to how the new concept of FDI, how FDI been calculated, gathered, surveyed, analyzed, interrupted, put on the strategic context, etc. But seeing the people around on this workshop, I really feel that the aspiration of us to achieve such technical support goes beyond, much beyond this workshop. It goes to unifying and producing one FDI report on GCC, like Economic Unify report for GCC. And this is only the start. This is the starting workshop on regional level. It might be another workshops on national level, depends on the development of the countries, and to what extent the secretaries of GCC will articulate the next step forward with UNCTAD and MENA Center. Before I leave the mic or the floor to our colleagues, let me just emphasize to what extent that I'm really happy to see our colleagues from UAE, from Kuwait, from Saudi Arabia, as well as from Bahrain, that taking part on such future thinking workshop, not only yes, we will really put our step to unify a lot of definitions, a lot of concepts, a lot of procedures, and you will see in the coming 3 days the technical work put by UNCTAD on this context. Very much welcoming you to Bahrain, very much welcoming you to this workshop. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you. I'll leave the floor for our colleagues, please.
Excellencies, Dr. Hejalis, Chairman of the MENA Center for Investment, distinguished delegates, good morning. Let me begin by thanking the MENA Center for Investment for co-organizing the workshop with us. Today, we are making a very important step of the joint initiative towards harmonizing data on FDI in these 6 country regions. UNCTAD is very pleased to be associated with these meetings, with this, I would say, the first regional workshop, which aims not only to understand better the concept or methodologies underlying the FDI, but more perhaps importantly, to decide or to discuss what we do next, the way forward. Therefore, this workshop is the testimony that I think you are increasingly seeing the FDIs as important vehicles for your countries to develop further in a sustainable manner. Now, compiling quality FDI data is the challenge, but not the impossible task at all. What is needed most is commitment from you to realizing data quality and the need to put in place the systems that supports efficient and effective compilations of FDI's data. FDI data matters because without quality FDI, it is not easy for you to formulate good policies. Good policies need quality data. Of course, the subject of the FDI we see here is not new at all. Everybody knows it. And perhaps even every day's newspaper you see as investment. UNCTAD has been working in that areas since the 1970s. And I don't know whether you know us, but UNCTAD has now been recognized as one of the most important organizations on FDI. Not only just, of course, the data, but also the analysis and reportings of the of FDI. Now, UNCTAD's role is, of course, to help you to achieve the objectives I mentioned, not just understand better the methodology, but also want to discuss what we're going to do in the next stage to get, as Dr. Hedger mentioned, to achieve the objective of producing perhaps what you call GCC investment report in the future. I know many of you participated already in the UNCTAD launchings of the World Investment Report in July, where Mr. Sastolovas came to see you face to face. Now, this report, as you see, it's on the global. If you want to see GCC, or even if you want to see your countries, Bahrain or Saudi Arabia or Kuwait or UAE, you don't see much, actually. And the world cannot get enough signals on your countries, on your regions, from the report we produce. That is the reason why we think, if you think actually FDI is important for your countries, for your region, then you have to send a signal yourself to the world that yes, FDI is welcomed. So that is why actually we are here today, just kick off the perhaps maybe 3 or 4 year long-term work to achieve the objectives. This is the first meeting, therefore I'm personally very pleased to be here. Now, for this meeting, of course, we have 3 days meetings, and perhaps you may feel a bit technical first day or second day, but on the third day, we'd like to discuss more strategically what we want to do, or what particularly you want to do. Do not forget, this is your workshop, not our workshop. So the ownership of the workshop is you. So therefore, your active participation is very much welcomed. Fortunately, we have few countries present, which means that we may be able to also hear the specific problems each country faces. This is something, of course, we can deal with. For this workshop, actually, as you have already before you, number of the articles, number of presentations, and of course, not so easy to understand within a few days, all the concepts, all the underlying the FDI, but at least before you leave on the third day, if you get something, at least FDI is very important for you. Not just it belongs to one agency, one particular person, it belongs to the nation as a whole. If you leave with that conviction, then I think that the meetings will be successful. So this is the beginnings, and I hope you bear with us, and perhaps sometimes you may feel boring, and try to, and as Mr. Strobas, since he's here a couple times and he knows you, so therefore he can perhaps entertain very well you. But I hope you work with us for the next 3 days, and let's get objective achieved. So thank you very much, and let's begin.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. We will have a break of 15 minutes before we start the first session of this workshop. Let me just take it again. Very most welcome to this workshop, especially our colleagues who have all the effort to fly over from UAE, Kuwait, and Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Thank you very much.
Good morning again. Now, let me start with the first sessions, which is UC's World Investment Report. As I mentioned to you already, in fact, Mr. Sastrova was here in July to launch the report. I don't know, how many of you already participated in his launching in July? Who came to the launch? No one? Okay, it's Hannah, only Hannah. Well, so then let me ask you, first of all, this report, World Investment Report, have you ever heard this report before you came? How many of you knew this report before you came? How many? Not so many. Then the first time to hear this report. First time? Still quite a lot. Okay. This report, as you see, this annual report normally comes in July, which depicts not only FDI trends at the global, regional, sometimes the country levels, but also it deals with a specific topic each year. Specific topic which is very relevant for all the countries, particularly developing countries, and sometimes very hot issue they discussed at the time. And if you look at the title, subtitle, Investing in the SDGs. What is SDGs? Very well. Yes. Sustainable Development Goals. As you may know, so next year, 2015, MDG, Millennium Development Goals, will be ended. Some of the goals, relatively okay in a sense, the achievement, but the majority of goals, unfortunately, not to be achieved. Therefore, the international community has been discussing since late last year, particularly this year and the following year, what we're going to do after the MDG, after the Millennium Development Goals. What we are coming up since for the next year is Sustainable Development Goals. There are several lessons why we could not achieve MDGs. I know all of the MDGs quite ambitious. Not just ambitious, but all the goals, of course, quite difficult to realize because within relatively short time. And what is lacking at the time and still now is that we have not looked upon the role that the private sector plays in achieving the goals. If you look at the Millennium Development Goals, for example, let's have the poverty level. Let's have all, let's get the access to everybody's education, health, and so on. Most of the goals are related to public goods. So therefore, people think that it is the public sector that have to play a role in achieving the goals. But many things have happened last 10 years or so, particularly the finance crisis. After the finance crisis, particularly developed countries which seriously hit, they don't have much money in public funds. Of course, this is one of the reasons why they couldn't achieve. And for the ODS, drastically declined. Nowadays, actually, it's a bit increasing. Therefore, one of the big lessons for us is how to get the private sector also involved in achieving the goals. We have sustainable, because as you see, we can discuss more development with sustainability. And particularly next year, in COP21 in Paris in December, they discuss what they're going to do, or they have to agree to binding agreement to limit the gas emission by the end of next year, because, as you know, Kyoto protocols also come to the end. Next year, 2015, SDGs will be achieved, or at least agreed upon, by all member states of the UN, because this is UN initiative. Therefore, all the member states of the UN have to agree and have to sign upon that goals. Of course, I don't know who comes. Normally, the head of the state comes to the New York to sign. Therefore, president or prime minister go there to sign, and it becomes commitment for you. And SDG is not just for the public sector to achieve. This is also for the private sector. Everybody should comply and try to achieve the objectives. We realized that the importance of the private sectors in playing, to reduce the poverty reductions, or reduce gas emissions, or in providing access to everybody in education, for example, or collect the gender balance, and so on. So that is why actually this year, 2014, since the new development goals coming, and we pick up these issues, how private sector can be part of it and achieve the goals. This is the main themes of the World Investment Report this year. But of course, everybody has different interest, perhaps. And just take a few examples. For example, perhaps in this region, you are interested in natural resources, for example. Then we have a report on the, investing in extractive industries. That we did already, particularly natural resources and oils and the minings. If you're interested, you can also look at that World Investment Report. We are looked at, for example, infrastructure. We look at the agriculture. This is by sector. By issue, for example, we also looked at a number of the issues. For example, we look at labor. We looked at for example, climate change, how we want to reduce or to investing in the low carbon economies, for example. So depending on the interest, actually, I'm sure it's various interests you have. I'm sure one of our reports, which actually already is nearly 25 years. There are 25 annual publications already. I'm sure you'll find the relevant topic, or topic which is interest to you. Because the topic itself does not fade its importance while the data becomes old, but the content itself is still, I would say, relevant. Now, the report itself Actually, there are two parts, mainly. First part deals with trends, FDI trends, globally and regionally, and sometimes the country, but the countries it's little, almost nothing. So therefore, the focus is either global regional levels. And then we have the main topic on this year, actually investing in the SDG, Sustainable Development Goals. I have three pillars of presentation today on this topic. First, I brief you the trends, global trends, and the regional trends in FDI. And I move on to recent trends in the policy development, policies which affect investment. And thirdly, we come to the main topic, which is SDGs. Here, actually, specifically, we propose concrete action plans for not only governments, but everybody to take in order to achieve the SDGs. SDGs itself to determine for the next 15 years goals. MDGs, which was adopted in 2000, comes in the 2015. The next set of goals, again for another 15 years, starting next year, 2015, and comes to the end of 2030. Now, if you look at this, this is the global FDI flows. And if there is any pointer, then it would be nice. Do you have a pointer? No? Now here, you have three different colors. Green, light greens, and yellow. And the total is the world. Therefore, the world is divided into three groups of economies. Green ones, developing countries. Light green, which is small band, that's for transition economies, essentially is Russia's and its former Soviet republics. Yellow one is for developed countries. What we can see here, this is global FDI flows. It's quite fluctuate, we see it. And the peak in 2007, nearly $2 trillion in the world. Now it comes to $1.6 trillion. What is interesting to see is perhaps the increasing investment to developing countries, the green band. For the 2013, 54%, more than one half of investment went to developing countries. If you look at like a beginning of 2000 or even the 1990s, developing countries, maybe it's 1/3 or so, but now it's more than 1/2. Of course, after the financial crisis, which has hit hard developed countries, that's why we see FDI flows to developed countries declined. But this trend, the question is whether this trend continues or not. We have 3 years projection here, 2014, 2015, 2016. This is our prospect. What do we see here? Again, developed countries come to play a more important role in in attracting investment. Therefore, by 2016, now, actually, the situation changed in a sense that more than half of the world FDI flows will go to developed countries. If you look at developing countries now, thank you. Of course, they still maintains relatively high economic growth rate, but as you see, number of the emerging market economies losing momentum. That's one of the reasons why so they may lose some momentum and get less investment. But obvious, still, absolute number itself, absolute value of FDI, still relatively high in developing countries. But when it comes to share itself, perhaps it may decline. That's what we predict. Therefore, if you see, over the next 3 years, FDI are expected to rise in developed countries. But developing countries still remains high. But how can we project for over the next 3 years? No data, obviously, that's the future. Actually, our numbers you see here, the projection, doesn't come from our head. It comes from a very scientific method, I have to say. There are 3 ways to project data for us. One was we asked big transnationals, big companies in the world, how much they're going to invest over the next 3 years. We ask, they tell us. Secondly, we have an economic model, forecast economic model. Like when you project GDP, you have an economic model to forecast economic growth. Same things, we have a model for FDI. We have the model to project investment flows. And thirdly, actually this report comes out normally the mid of the year. Therefore, we look at at least first quarters of the year's data to see at least where we are moving. So we consider these 3 elements to come to our own projections. Yes?
Yeah. The question, I want to go back to the SDGs. And today, of course, very few countries in the world that have been able to achieve these goals. And the only country that I know for sure, and the United Nations published a report for that, is Malaysia, that they achieved the SDGs. But if you look at Africa, for example, today probably is one of the worst places as far as the implementation and achievement. Most of these goals, and I think there are 8 of them, they fall within the domain of the public sector. So the private sector has not very much involved in these, and that's why without the involvement of the government, it will be very difficult to implement these goals. And the question that I wanted basically to ask, and if the FDI is important for the implementation of these goals, how much out of this money, the FDI that went to the developing countries, has been allocated for the achievement of SDGs?
Well, thank you, sir, for the question. In fact, we are going to deal with in the 3rd pillar of my presentation on SDGs. We will come to that point later on. But just to tell you, so we are looking at FDI, which is just one part of investment. And of course, there are other kinds of investment. And FDI, so is one of the investment, but different from other investment in a sense that FDIs normally becomes part of development finance. If you get the FDI, normally the investment is used for productive purposes. That's why it's called for direct investment, not indirect investment. However, these days, even short-term investment, short-term in a sense it may stay in a year or so, still they may be used to finance the development objectives. Therefore, for us, while FDI is perhaps the most important development finance developing countries may receive, but of course this is one of them, they may also receive other types of investment, particularly more perhaps for developing countries, particularly poor countries like Africa you mentioned. Still ODS is very important. ODA is not private, of course it's public, but ODA is still quite important sources for development, particularly very poor countries.
But it is also true that FDI is a profit-driven kind of investment. Yes. FDI is a profit-driven investment. So that's why FDI is not interested in education, not interested in health. They're basically interested to make money.
Exactly. Actually, this is the point. Whether the private sector is interested in investing in the SDG area, so it should be profitable. Otherwise, any private sector do not want to come to invest. Then, if you look at the SDG sectors, like even education, like health, or like infrastructure, you may assume or you may tend to think that these things should be provided by the public sector. But if you look at particularly developed countries, more than half, like infrastructure, when it comes to infrastructure, like 60% of the investment which comes from the private sector. Education, same thing. 30–40% come easily from the private sector. Health, same. Then why in developed countries, at least, private sector can also come to invest? Simply because perhaps there are bankable projects in these sectors as well. Then one of the important lessons to us, in the area of SDGs, we have to make efforts to identify such projects which are also profitable, at least the private sector can find interesting. This mechanism is lacking at this moment. And this mechanism was lacked during the last 15 years, when tried to Millennium MDGs. That is why most of the goals did not achieve. But when we look at the various Millennium Development Goals, perhaps the goal which is nearly achieved is education, actually. But when you look at education, the goal itself, it's universal access to the primary level of education. That is a goal. For everybody should have a right to have the minimum or the primary level of education for all. That is a goal. And in most countries, it's achieved, actually. Of course, there are some exceptions, but compared to the others. But anyways, let me come back later on when we discuss the SDGs. At this moment, let me continue to FDI trends. It is fine so far. The next panel is to show you who got the most. Perhaps, I don't know, so perhaps you may know that who got the most. US, the largest recipient, followed by China, Russia, Hong Kong, Brazil, Singapore, and so on. There are 20 countries here, top 20 countries. The largest ones, US, $188 billion. And the Bahrain's the host countries is about 1 billion. Therefore, it doesn't come to the top 20, obviously. Now, the point is not just to give you a ranking here. The point is that when you look at these 20 countries, what you can see, again, we see two different colors. One in green, one in yellow or orange. Green ones is developing countries, and orange one or yellow ones is developed countries. If you look at the top 20, about half of the top 20s is developing countries, either developing countries or Russia, or transition economies.
Yeah, I mean, take into consideration these numbers of FDI and the distributions of FDI globally. And if you take Singapore, Singapore has about 4 million people, and India is 1.2 billion people. How can you justify, for example, the size of foreign direct investment in such a small country compared to an India? And India has tremendous amount of potential as far as resources, as far as people, and as far as manufacturing and industries. I mean, can, let's say, the United Nations be in a position to help, for example, those countries, in particular, the developing countries, to gain access to some of the foreign direct investment that can help them in at least achieving their SDGs?
Well, first of all, just not to misunderstand, the data we are looking at, not investment in SDGs. We are looking at the foreign direct investment as a whole. Now, the president from the UAE made a good remark in the sense that, big countries or countries with a lot of resources reasonably able to attract a lot of investment, of course. Therefore, these rankings is just based on the absolute amount of the investment. If you look at another indicator, for example, FDI per capita, how much FDI they get per person, or was FDI per like $1 of GDP, how much FDI is coming per $1 of GDP, for example. Different indicators if you pick. Then obviously you get different ranking. You get different ranking. Then when like China, obviously, it's a lot of population, big population, therefore it does not come to the second ranking in the world. It may be towards the end. So therefore, all it depends on what kind of the indicators you look at, and then the rankings may be different. And to me, actually, we understand that the people like this kind of ranking. Because when we produce this kind of report, what the countries do at the beginning, just to see where's my country's ranking in the world. Our positions increased or declined. That is what the people are interested in. And we always telling the world, FDI flows. Of course, this is a very important indicator to show at least how much you got investment. But it does not mean that the amount you got is used fully in the production, actually. This comes to later on when we come to discuss the concept or methodologies, the investment. If you get $1 billion of investment every year from abroad, do you think the $1 billion investment or $1 billion is used for the product purposes. It may be used to buy land. It may be used land by some things for speculative purposes. It doesn't bring anything value added from there. But unfortunately, this also comes into FDI. Therefore, that's where the quality of investment becomes very important, not just the quantity, but quality of investment. Then, as you mentioned, investment SDGs is quality investment, I would say. So therefore, actually, the investment, therefore, if we rank the countries by investment in the SDG or investment in their or MDGs, maybe also you got a different ranking. But while the countries try to attract investment, not just look at the absolute amount or the quantity, but also pay attention to what kind of investment you want. The investment which is good, which should be useful for development, that should be welcomed. Sometimes, investment which may harm your economies, that also exists. But this is something I want to talk to you more when we discuss FDI policies. But so far, so is it okay? My answer for the time being? Yes. Now, we come to this by region. We have world, and we split into three groups of economies: developed, developing, and the transition economies. Under developed, you have EU, North America. Under developing, you have Africa, Asia. Under Asia is Southeast Asia, South Asia, West Asia, where, of course, your countries belong to, Latin America and the Caribbean, and Oceania, and so on. Now, what you can see here, 2007, I mentioned to you this peak year. Compared to 2007, what do we see last 2 years? Mentioned to you $2 trillion, now $1.5 trillion. Developed countries still only 57% of the peak. Under developing countries, I want you to look at particularly Asia, which is more, in 2013, it's more than peak level. Asia continues to receive investment. And if you look at this, Asia exceeded already EU. In 2007, for example, EU, 864, gets more than Asia as a whole, maybe 2 times more, but now they get half of Asia. And here we have different groups of economy, which is called structurally weak, vulnerable, and small economies. These are LDCs, which are least developed countries, LDCs, landlocked developing countries, SIDS, small island developing states. All these 3 groups economies are special groups as defined by the UN, and we give special attention because they are, how is it, the poorer economies in developing countries, in order the poorest groups in the world. Therefore, they got not so much investment. Now, we switch from inward investment to outward investment. At least the inward investment, what we could see was that the developing countries become more and more important, absorbing more than half of investment, global investment. Now, out of the investment, what we can see. Here, this is a share in the global FDI outflows by group of economies. Green ones for developing and transition economies, and yellow ones, orange ones, developed economies. Over the past 15 years or so, if you look at the share of developing countries, it's rising, up to 40% or so. Not yet, the shares achieved in the FDI inflows, but also FDI outflows. Developing countries becoming more and more important. They are becoming investors. Then, obviously, particularly for the agencies which promote foreign investment, they should also look at developing country investors. In other words, there's a diversified source of the investment, not just developed countries, also developing countries. Similar chart for the outward investment, who are the top investors. We have 20 largest investors here. Again, US top, followed by Japan, China, Russia, and so on. Again, we have two colors, one for greens, which is developing countries, and one for orange or yellow, which is for developed countries. Again, here, not half of them, but 6 of them, 6 of 20s are developing countries or Russia. So far, we have discussed FDIs by country or by region. Now we turn to FDI by sector. Then obviously people interested in where investors invest. And here we have 3 sectors: primary, manufacturing, and services. Primary, as you see, natural resources, particularly oils and minings, agriculture also is here, primary. Manufacturing and services, perhaps you know more or less what the industries belong to these 2 different sectors. Now, we have we have Africa here. What kind of image you have about Africa? Obviously, you may think, if they get investment, it must be mining, it must be oil, it must be natural resources. If you look at over the past decade, 2004 up to 2013, primarily, while it is true, like mid-2000, more than half of investment went to primary sector, but this share is going down to only 1/10 last year. Instead, services or manufacturing is increasing, particularly services increasing. Services like telecommunications, like banking, particularly these 2 sectors, they're the big sectors which attract investment in Africa. Of course, there are other sectors like tourism and so on, but they still attract but not so large as the telecommunication, for example. Right part, you see LDC. LDC is the least developed countries. I mentioned to you this is one of the special groups which is poorest in the countries, in the world. There are 50 LDCs as defined by the UN. In these poorest countries, we can say the same thing. Manufacturing or services, majorities of the investment, not necessarily primary. I don't know whether this in the picture more or less how they jive with your mind or thinking. What is important to you? Actually, here we are looking at foreign direct investment. And in the primary area, primary sector, actually is the way of investing in the primary is not necessary all the time through foreign direct investment. For example, in your countries, perhaps in the oil sector, normally the foreign ownership is prohibited, like exploration. Then how they come in? Foreign investors. They cannot own, but still they can come in. For example, they may have kind of the production sharing agreement. Foreign company provide technology, for example, or even provide whatever is required, but they get the production in return. This kind of arrangement does not involve any investment. Then, of course, if it's not investment, it doesn't come under foreign direct investment. And this kind of well, I would say, not necessarily investment, because it's not an equity investment. This kind of involvement by transnational corporations, by foreign company, we call actually in a name which is non-equity mode of operation. Production sharing is a typical case. In agriculture, like same thing, contact farming. These types of special arrangement do not necessarily involve cash or do not necessarily involve equity investment. Therefore, they are not counted as FDI. And they are treated differently. And in the primary sector, even though we have a lower share in FDI, it does not mean that the importance of the foreign company in the sectors is also small. If their way of involvement is different, we cannot say so. And this is something we have to know this concept. Not now. Later on when we discuss the methodologies of the FDI. But at least when you look at FDI, primary sectors is smaller and smaller. But this may also represent what the country shows. If you look at your country, or many countries actually in the world, developed or developing countries, service sector is the largest sector actually. Like a developed country, more than 60%, nearly 70% of GDP in services. Many developing countries, same thing. So therefore, this kind of the sectoral patterns may also reflect the country's the economies. Now, using all these investment flows, they're supposed to be engaged in the production. And this is the result of the production. International production by TNCs. Every year is supposed to increase, actually, because you have a question? Yes.
Could you explain just why is, I didn't understand this shift. It's like a very big shift in the pattern from investing in primary to investment, to services, sorry. And over the 10 years, nothing really. I mean, services have always been the major sector for investment, even before 2004. So why is this sudden shift from, investing in primary to investing in services?
Well, so perhaps in Africa, and also particularly after, but this period, last decade or so, do not forget that the financial crisis there. Therefore, so because of this, for example, demand for the natural resources may have declined. So that's why actually it may also affect the lowering shares of the primary sector. But overall, what I could say, but this is just Africa. But if you look at the other regions, you can say the same things. Over the years, the share of the primary sectors is declining. In other words, actually, before, when you invest in developing countries, perhaps they may have invested in natural resources essentially, for example, long time ago. But now Asia, from the beginning, is different because Asia does not have natural resources much except Indonesia and so on. But what is important, we deliberately picked up these regions because Africa is a region where if there's investment, it must be natural resources. That is the overall perception, I think. But now, it's changing. It's different. Why all of a sudden shift over the past decade or so? I don't know whether these shares may going up, maybe going up after the again, financial crisis. Still, in the world is suffering from the crisis. Once it comes back to the normal, then it may be different. There may be more demand for natural resources in Africa. But overall, the share of services. Well, of course, this is annual, and FDI flows, depending on which kind of a project is invested. It may be also drastically change the share. Perhaps 2013 is the big investment in telecommunication, for example, because one deal may be like billions of dollars, for example. Africa gets $50 billion every year. $50 billion every year. If one project like $10 billion, it's easily change the share. It may also affect, that's why in the primary or service sectors, all of a sudden increased in 2013. But here what we want to see is a particular share of the primary sector which declined over the years. Maybe this is the pattern set in many parts of the world. Did I answer to you, or yes? Okay. Now coming back to these international productions, we can measure international production by different measures. We see here employees. How many foreign companies employ? How many or how much the foreign company generate in sales, or generate in value added, or how much they have assets, or how much they export, and so on. Of course, there are many more indicators or variables. like how much they engage in R&D, and so on. This chart shows you, for example, value added. If you look at the value added, we look at only foreign companies, foreign affiliates. We look at the foreign companies operating here, foreign companies operating in different parts of the world. We combine, then they account for 10% of global FDI, also global GDP. 1/10 of the value added is generated by foreign companies. $8 trillion exports. World export is about $21, $22 trillion. Maybe 2013, maybe $24 trillion. It's 1/3. Foreign affiliates, foreign companies accounts for 1/3 of the global exports. Adding to this, for example, operation by parent companies, you have more or higher numbers. Here, what they could say is transnational corporation, TNCs, which comprise of the parent companies and its own subsidiaries all together. They account for their quite high shares of all economic activities in the world. Here we are looking at only foreign affiliates or foreign companies operating in host economies. And the important things, every year, normally they increase, employment, number of employees increase, sales increase, and so on. Because FDI flows normally positive if you aggregate, which means stock itself was expanding every year. Therefore, numbers supposed to increase. Okay, so far I discussed the most global and the regional investment trends. And I move on to the next pillar of presentation, which is policies. Any questions so far? Yes, please.
Hello, thank you a lot for the presentation. I have a number of questions actually. The first one is on how does the FDI inflow trend compare with capital inflows around the world? So we've seen where the FDI inflows have been going, so how can we compare that to capital inflows? The second question is that you're saying that it's projected that FDI inflows in developed countries are going to increase to about 52%. Is this because of more developed countries' investment in developed countries, or are more developing countries investing in developed countries now? Are we seeing a shift in that sense? And finally, when we talk about TNCs, what is the share of developing country TNCs, and is the number of TNCs also increasing over the years, and hence we're seeing more accumulation of assets and employees and sales and so on and so forth?
First of all, yes, for your first question, what is the relationship between the investment flows and the capital flows? Whilst FDI flows fluctuate, and what's happened to the capital flows? That is your question, perhaps. Actually, in order to answer this question, of course, we have defined what capital means here. And I mentioned to you, so FDI flows supposed to be, or supposed to be part of the capital flows. Capital flows, if you consider like the capital which constitute to the the capital formation of the country. Then FDI is supposed to be part of this. And FDI, why it is important for many countries, past developing countries, it does not account for the majorities of capital flows in the countries, first of all. It accounts for at most maybe 10 to 15%. Therefore, the remaining part of investment, 80%, 85%, should come from domestic sources. The domestic investment should play a larger role than FDI flows. FDI flows always complement domestic investment. Therefore, when FDI flows fluctuate, total capital flows may also fluctuate, but it all depends how much that they have in domestic investment. If domestic investment is big enough, even if FDI flows declines, domestic investment increase, overall capital flows increase. So it all, I think, depends on the countries. So this is the first question to you, answer to you. The second question is the change or shift of the direction of flows. Was recently, the UNCTAD has produced, in fact, Astrid produced the statistical book on bilateral FDI flows on the stock. We look at each country where the investment goes, in the case of outward, and from where investment comes, in the case of inward investment. And we see the directions of flows or stocks. And in developing countries, the most important characteristics of FDI flows in developing countries is actually the importance of developing countries more important, in the sense that FDI flows from developing countries tend to go to other developing countries. That's for sure. Like maybe 2/4, maybe not 1/2, maybe two-thirds or so. Quite big. The biggest countries is, of course, in ASEAN region. That's quite high. And also GCC must be quite high. Unfortunately, we don't have a good status for GCC. I cannot tell much, but I'm sure if you look at the GCC's investment, the majority is investment, inter-regional investment from one country to another in the same region. This is the South-South investment. Therefore, from developing country to developing countries is quite important. However, from the recipient point of view, from developing country recipient point of view, still investment for developed countries is more than investment from developing countries. As I mentioned to you, still actually developed countries investment, outward investment account for the 60% or so, more than half still. In the developed countries, we see the increasing investment from the south, from developing countries, particularly in Europe, we see it. And their investment, investment from developed countries, essentially, of course, mainly goes to the other developed countries. But still, actually, so for the EU, like, so investment in Latin America or Africa or Asia, they still maintain some, investment, but their load, their shares is declining considerably. While in the case of the United States, invest from the US in Latin America, still quite high. Investment from United States to Asia, quite high, in fact increasing a lot. Japan, which is the second largest investors, much of the investment also goes to Asia, which is quite high, increasing over the years. Therefore, of course, it depends on the region or countries. We can say much, so because we cannot say the same things. The trends may be different. But the major characters I mentioned to you, from the south, from developing countries, the most important direction is other developing countries. From the developed countries, it all depends. We cannot say, one common character, I would say. But still, developing countries as a host quite important to developed countries, and so on. Therefore, in both cases, as I mentioned to you, both cases, inward and outward, the importance of developing countries is growing. That at least we can say, commonly. Now, sorry, the third question, say it again, please. Share of the developing countries in the TNCs. Well, when you look at the number or the value itself, obviously is the FDI from the South accounts for 40%. Therefore, it's increasing, as I mentioned to you. But when it comes to the number, perhaps, of TNCs, for example, we count the number of TNCs in the world. It could be 100,000. 100,000 TNCs in the world. Of course, it depends how you define the TNCs. Actually, we define the TNCs, the companies which have at least one foreign affiliate abroad. That's what we call the TNCs, 100,000 TNCs. And perhaps when you look at the numbers of the TNCs, I think that the developing countries quite also big numbers. I don't have the statistics with me now, but perhaps out of 100, maybe 30, 40,000 are from the south. And the rest maybe from the developed countries. But when it comes to foreign affiliates, how many? Of course, the TNCs, when they go abroad, they establish the companies, these foreign affiliates. Foreign affiliates, maybe 800 or 1 million foreign affiliates in the world, nearly 1 million foreign affiliates. And many of them, more than the developed countries, actually foreign affiliates located in developing countries. That we can see. Okay, any other questions? Then now we move to the next pillar, next to the areas of my presentation, which is the policy development. Policy is quite important, obviously. With good policies, you may be able to attract investment. If you look at the FDI policies over the past 2 decades or 3 decades, like in the 1980s, what the world did at the time is first liberalize the investment regimes. If there's no liberalization, no one is able to come. First of all, they open up the countries, and they open up investment area so that the foreign companies can come in. That's the beginnings of the FDI history, starting with the liberalization. This trend continues. this trend continues. If you look at 2000 here, there are many policy changes which affect investment. Changes which are more liberalizations, less regulations, more promotion, and so on. And if you look at the 2000, actually all the changes which affect investment, most of the changes towards liberalization and promotion. And those which are against liberalization or more regulations, more restriction is only 6%. Therefore, we could safely say beginning of 2000, up to 2000, the majority of the investment is for pro-investment, I would say. Over the past 15 years or so, what you can see here. One in green is declining, while the one in orange is increasing. In 2013, 27% of all the changes which affect investment are toward more regulations, more restriction, not liberalization, not promotion. Of course, there's more, in terms of numbers, there's more in the liberalization promotion than in the case of restrictions or regulations. What we can see here, maybe again, so you may have thought different way in a sense that the countries, if they introduce any changes, it may be more pro-investment. But the world is not such a case. Moving seems to be different directions. This is what we can see, not only in developing countries, but also developed countries. Just to pick up an example, in developing countries, it's easy to find, like many parts of the few countries, I said, in Latin America, they nationalized the oil sector. They expelled all TNCs, for example, or at least they cut off the agreement with foreign transnationals in the oil sector, and they nationalized the oil sector. That is, of course, it's counted under the restriction regulation. United States introduced more, how do you say, or tightening the monitoring of investment, particularly when the investment comes from state-owned companies or investment which comes from sovereign wealth funds, for example. In particular, those investment which is directed to the strategic sectors. If you recall, several years ago, when in the Dubai Port World, where the investment tried to acquire investment in the United States, now they tried to acquire the UK company which owns the facilities in the US, the port facilities. At the times, United States succeeded in dissuading, discouraging UAE, the Port World, Dubai Port World, not to invest. Why they are doing this? Isn't the investment should be free, or should be restricted? This is the very, how do you say, very challenging area you have to think. While you have to maintain liberalization, same time you want to preserve what we call policy space, where you want to protect your strategic sectors. Why strategic sectors, particularly harbors, like port facilities? In a port facility like airport, anybody can come in. Anybody can come in. And at the times, because of the terrorist attack, the U.S. land, they are quite sensitive in that area. If such areas like airport, like harbors, are owned by foreigners, not just foreigners, by foreign government, it may be danger for them. That's what they thought. Anyone could come in if they're owned by somebody else. They may be able to bring in any kind of, for example, arms or whatever. They can bring in anything if they cannot control. But this is just one of the examples. In other areas, particularly like natural resources, many countries now, developing countries, want to preserve the right to the fair shares of proceeds emanating from exploration. That is why they want to introduce the new agreement with transnationals, for example. Some cases, it sounds like restrictions or regulation. But it doesn't mean that the companies are moving not a different direction toward less restrictive investment. I would say more countries becomes more sensitive to the use of investment, particularly investment for development. Now there's investment for sustainable development. That is why actually countries introduce the measures which allow the host countries to preserve the right to develop in their own way. I would say, in the way they want to. If they have wrong investment, they have right to say, sorry, not good, so therefore try to dissuade. Actually, not only United States, Canada, Australia also tightened the monitoring of investment. And you can, of course, list out the number of cases which are not allowed to invest. So this is what we see. But majority still more liberalizations and the promotion, as you see, like countries which Myanmar, for example, just opened up the market, opened up the investment. Now the investments are flowing in. In the case of Myanmar, I would say all the policy changes towards maybe liberalizations or promotion at this moment.
If you project this in isolation for developing and transitional economies, I would guess that you would probably get something a bit different than this, wouldn't you?
Well, it's a very important question. If you see this by developing countries only or by developed countries only, it may have different picture. But in both cases, I think that, of course, some figures may be different, but the direction is the same. Actually, direction is the same. Both developed countries, developing countries. What we see is more, importance in restrictive or regulated measures introduced in both cases. But UNCTAD also developed a database on policy changes. Therefore, for example, 2013, there are about 100 policy changes. And I don't know, we can see it on the web now. Yes, therefore, if you go to the UNCTAD website, and you can see all these changes, 100 cases in 2013, and you can see this is for the pro or anti-investment and so on. And so over the past years, not necessarily over the past, at least a few years, last years, you can see it, and you can verify yourself. Any other questions? Now, this year, the report in the policy areas, we had surveys on incentives. Now, if you look at the previous chart, the changes toward liberalization promotion, 73% in 2013. Among these changes, or among these policy measures, the majorities of them is investment incentives. In 2013, more than half of the changes relating to incentives. Incentives could be fiscal incentives, normally like lower corporate tax rate, or the tax holidays, and so on. Why the countries gives incentives? I don't know what kind of incentives your countries provide, but the majorities of the countries, they say they give incentives if they create jobs. If they provide, foreign companies provide technology. If they promote export, if they promote the linkages with local industries, and so on. You see different reasons here. I want you to look at these reasons, and I want you to look at particularly like environmental or social reasons. Then it comes to here, environment protections, promotion. It comes toward the bottom of the ranking. They give incentives instead for the economic objectives, not necessarily to promote environment protection or social protection yet. So therefore we see currently focus more on economic performances, not necessarily in social or environmental goals. When we talk about policies, we can talk about at the national level, and we can talk about at international level. Now, next two charts is on the policies at international level. When it comes to international policies, perhaps you may easily think FDI or EPA. I don't know how you call it here. Like Bahrain has, I think, FTA in the United States, Singapore. GCC countries has already FTAs with the EU, and under negotiation with Japan, I believe, and also negotiations with the United States and so on. That's regional ones. But most of the international agreements we see here is bilateral one, which is bilateral investment treaties. That's called BITs. Here, BITs, bilateral investment treaties, which is green, which is the orange one. The other ones is the green one, which is other international investment agreements, other IIS mentioned like EPAs in our regional agreements. What we can see here, actually the bar chart shows how many agreements concluded every year. Therefore, you see the left part, the scale. And this line chart is accumulation. Therefore, you look at the right scale. In 2013, 44 new investment agreements signed, bringing all together more than 3,000 agreements, 3,236. More than 3,000 agreements. And the 44 agreements here, this is 50. What you can see here, particularly after 2000, the number of the agreements concluded at the international levels declining over the years. This is one trend we can look on this chart. What else we can see here? Perhaps the share of green is becoming larger and larger. Larger and larger. They are moving from BITs to the other agreements. It could be regional agreements, it could be FTA, it could be EPA, and so on. This is the second trend we can see. Now, the number itself, 3,200. How do you read? Is it too many or not so much? Not so much in the sense that the world is still able to conclude more, and so on. What we can see in the international investment agreements area, it's already too many. And one country has too many agreements. Sometimes these agreements contradict each other because you have different agreements with each country, for example. It's not so easy to handle such case. If you have the same agreement with others, maybe less problematic, but not necessarily the case because the agreement is different. This inconsistency is arising. More importantly, there's still gaps. Gaps in the sense that with these 3,000 agreements, which are too many, sometimes people call it spaghetti ball, with too many agreements, complicated, conflicting, contradicting, and what they are doing now, actually, that is one of the reasons why we see from the BIT to the regional agreements, so that they don't need to, negotiate at the bilateral level. For example, if you look at the EU stopped already in negotiations in individual countries. EU as a whole, EU 27 countries, has the authority to negotiate any investment agreement. Not any longer Germany, not any longer France, not any longer individual countries. Only one, so 27 countries come together, which obviously reduces the number of such agreements. With these 3,000 agreements, gap still exists, I mentioned, gap in the sense that it does not cover the entire FDI in the world. It covers still only 70% or so FDI in the world. Still 30% of FDI is not protected, is not covered by any of the measures. So the question to you, what do you do? You want to continue to negotiate until you cover 100% of FDI? You know, in the world, 100 or 200 economies, 197 economies in the world, at least member states of the UN. If they conclude investment agreement each other bilaterally, how many do you think you need? It's a mathematical question to you. In the world, 200, for example, they have to agree, they have concluded bilaterally this agreement. How many do you think they need? Sorry? 100? 200 economies in the world, you need only 100? Is agreement? For example, Bahrain has to negotiate 199 economies. Bahrain has 199 agreements. Kuwait has 109 also. Yeah, actually, yes. Of course, how do you calculate it? 200 times, and divide. Yes, 2 factorial, yes. Exactly, yes. It's huge. It's huge, 20,000 nearly. We have only 3,000 still, but too many already. Are you ready to negotiate another 70,000? No one. No one. And it's a waste of time, not just for time, it's resources and so on. Therefore, so what the world is moving, it was more actually regional agreements. As you see, the emphasis is more given to regional ones, as in the multilateral ones at this moment do not work much, like at the WTO, for example. Another chart, which is very, all the time, so many issues when you negotiate with other countries. Always, these issues comes up as important in the discussions among and between negotiators, which is ISDS, Investor-State Dispute Settlement. Normally, in BITs, bilateral investment treaties, or FTAs, with regard to the investment clauses, normally this clause is included. When there's any dispute, problems with investment, what they do? That is this ISDS provides the right to the company to sue the country if the country do not comply with the agreement. If you look at the number of such cases, increasing over the years, increasing. And in 2013, 56 new cases were brought in. Where they brought in, here again we have exceed ICSID and non-ICSID. Exceed is investment centers for, International Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes. That is part of the World Bank Group. And green ones is non-exceed, which is maybe International Chamber of Commerce, or UNISTOL, which is the part of the UN committees on the dispute settlement, and so on. But the majority is normally through the exceed. That's where cases brought in. Whereas the broad chart shows the annual cases which are brought in. Therefore, as long as it's positive, accumulation should continue to rise. So all the time it's increasing. I mean, here's the bar chart, not the line chart. Line chart is accumulation. You mean the...
Yeah, the relation is
yeah, but here you have to look at this scale, yeah? Accumulation.
more relation is this number to, this is, rather than
But I think the here, left scale and right scale is different. Left scale is for the number of the cases every year. Like, for example, 2013, 53, 56. But total 560 or so. This is the scale for the accumulation. So therefore, increasing over the years. So any any problem? Yeah. Now, so you are trying to link this with the stories of the more national policy change, which more restrictive, more, yes. This clause on ISDS, I don't think this is like anti-liberalization or pro-liberalization. To me, like a bilateral investment treaties is more or less like, in a positive way because it protects investment. Therefore, I would think this ISDS, which is a part of the agreement, should be the measures, pro-investment measures, I would say. But your question is then in that case, why the district measure is rising? Is that the question? This one. This one, yeah? Why this is increasing? Yeah. So 56 cases, you may think a lot, or you may think not so much. Every year, there are more than 30,000 investment cases, new investment, foreign investment. Out of 30,000, 56, to me, it's not so big. The reason, yeah, of course, when you put the chart, quite dramatic in the sense that there's a lot of disputes going on. But the majority of the investment is not such cases, actually, if you compare the 3,000, 30,000 every year and the investment cases. But why such, this ISDS highlighted simply because the fine involved is so huge in the sense that the countries, normally developing countries sued, they are not able to pay the fines. Yes. That is the problems we see here in ISDS. So therefore, of course, there are many problems in the current the system of ISDS itself. For example, it's arbitrators. Arbitrators normally, same arbitrators that are chosen, for example. And they are not necessarily, they are supposed to be fair to all the parties, but sometimes not necessarily the case. And there are many problems in the current regime of the ISDS. Therefore, what they are talking about is how we can reform, particularly this ISDS. Reform in the sense that there are several ways countries can reform it. If your countries has an agreement which contains ISDS, and there are several options for you when it comes to renewals of the agreement, because any kind of agreement comes to the end for the renewal. There are several options. One option, of course, no, we don't need it. So let's not include this clause any longer. That's one option. Or we may restrict the use of ISDS very in only limited cases. We limit the use of the ISDS. So it all depends. In fact, like Austria, for example, they don't have ISDS. Some countries do not intentionally include ISDS because they don't want to get involved in a dispute, particularly the area where the natural resources is crucial. Because when you look at ISDS, most of cases, natural resources, like the energy sector, energy area, for example. It all depends on, I cannot judge. I don't know where you are from. Are you from Bahrain? I don't know what kind of agreements you have with the United States or with Singapore in ISDS. And, but of course, countries have a right. If they don't, the current system of ISDS is not good for the host countries. It's more in the favor of investors. There's, of course, when it comes to the negotiation, you can reform. Now, any question on the policies before we move on to the last presentation? Of this session, which is the main topic. Fine. Then let's see, the final chapter, final leg of my presentation, which is investing in the SDGs. We, as I mentioned to you, have to galvanize all actions to realize the goals. Because we failed all the MDGs, we should not fail in the next set of goals. Since we are dealing with investment, therefore we are looking at how investment can play a role in achieving the SDGs. SDGs for the next 15 years, 2015 to 2030. Now, we estimated how much investment is needed to achieve the SDGs. In the next slide, I will show you what kind of the goals we will have. But based on the SDGs, which we are currently negotiate, we need investment needs of $3.9 trillion every year. Every year. If the current investment continues, we got only $1.4 trillion. There's a gap, investment gap, which is amounting to $2.5 trillion. This $2.5 trillion investment gap, who will finance? You expect public sector to do this, or you expect foreign government to do this through ODA and so on? Neither way. This is where we see the potential for private sector involvement. And here, we see a different SDG sector. This is not all, but the majority, like power, climate change mitigation, food security, telecommunication, transport, ecosystem, biodiversity, health, water, sanitation, climate change, adaptations, education, and so on. You see the bar, and also the, how you call this, diamond sign. Dark green one and the light green one, you see. For some sectors, we have range estimate, not necessarily point estimate. Point estimate is this one. These are point estimates. If the current trend continues, private sector's investment could be this amount, for example, the power, like about $200 to $300 billion. However, if private sectors comes to play a larger role than before, in other words, larger role in the sense that we are looking at all developing countries here, mind you, because MDGs and the SDGs apply essentially to developing countries. If in developing countries, private sector plays a role which is almost equivalent in developed countries, where there's a larger role of the private sector that play, then we have a higher so participations by the private sector everywhere, of course. And we see that there's potential for like a particular infrastructure and also the food security and also climate change. That's the area where we see the potential huge for the private sector. In order to get private sectors involved, we need kind of strategic framework. We have here 4 different blocks. We need leadership. I explain to you later what is contained in each block. We have a strong leadership to guide how we move towards the goals. We have to mobilize funds. After mobilizing, we have to channel the fund to the right sectors. Not only mobilizing channelings, but also we have to see the impact of the investment in the SDGs, increasing the benefits and minimizing the negative risks. Under the leadership, we have to agree on a common set of guiding principles. I'll mention to you later what kind of the principles, guiding principles we could consider. Of course, we have to set what kind of investment targets we should. Policy coherence, consistencies is required. And we make it the policies, stakeholder platforms, and multi-agency technical assistance facilities. In mobilizing funds, creating fertile soil for innovative SDG financing. We don't have much. That is why in the SDGs, MDGs, they couldn't achieve the goals because they couldn't get private sector involved. If there is a soil for private sector to be involved, then actually they can mobilize the funds, build and improve pricing mechanism. Because if you look at normal investment project, you can easily calculate how much you get. Normally people can calculate benefits or how do you say this, streams of the profits you receive. But in the SDG sector, because of the specific natures of the activities, it's not so easy. So therefore we need kind of the pricing mechanism. Promote sustainable stock exchanges. At this moment, there are more than 20 stock exchanges in the world which belong to sustainable stock exchanges, like New York, like London, in this region, Ankara Stock Exchange, also one of the members of the stock exchange market. This is actually UN initiatives. Ban Ki-moon introduced this initiative several years ago, and the UNCTAD plays a kind of secretary role for this, promoting the world stock exchanges to join the initiative. Once they join, then they provide kind of tools to their member companies, how they can monitor with the investment SDGs and so on. Introducing financial market reforms. One of the examples is, for example, the rating agency, so Moody or whatever the rating agencies, like which provides 3 A's or 2 A's, 1 A, and so on. So they don't consider how much the companies so invest in SDGs, for example. There are the ratings based on different the mechanism. So therefore, they may also consider the element of the SDG, to what extent companies also involved in that area. Then it may be different, because evaluation of the companies may be different. Evaluations may be based on a different criteria. Channelings of the funds, we should alleviate entry barriers. At the same time, we have to safeguard public interest. This is important because normally SDG sectors are those which provided by the government, are provided by the public sector. The reason is simply these sectors or public goods are too important for anybody. That's why the government or did not let the private sector to handle. They're still sensitive, so in the way that private sector is involved. Therefore, even if the private sector is involved, they should have, kind of legitimate to protect their public interest. Expand use of risk sharing and mitigation mechanism. Like, for example, the investment guarantees may also be extended to the SDG sectors. New incentive schemes, a new generation of investment promotion institute. New incentive schemes, I mentioned to you, at this moment, not many countries regard environment or social protections the important objectives of incentives. Build SDG investment partnership, particularly between host and home countries. Host countries, invest promotion agencies, and home countries, maybe economic development agency and so on. They may together promote investment in the SDGs. And now impact. These areas tend to be forgotten, actually. Once you promote, everything seems to be fine, but not necessarily such a case unless we measure how good, how bad that investment is. Now, and one of the interesting cases is, with the build product capacity, entrepreneurship, technology, skills, linkages. And one of the examples is that the ones undertaken by UNCTAD to promote the educations of the entrepreneurship in the SDGs at business school, for example. Because any business school, they are in the business model not necessarily built upon the activities which undertake in poor economies or SDGs sectors. So if they bring in such education skills to the business school, then the people who go to the business school may have different concept on how they also involved in their own future investment or in economic activities. Now, I think this is the last slide. Here, we have framework for the private sector to be involved. Now, we need push strongly to this framework. There are concrete 6 actions here. All of them feasible, viable, and this is too small for you to read, but I hope you can read on here in a handout. Just giving these 6 action package, the new generation of investment promotion and strategies, the orientation of investment incentives, regional SDG investment compact. This is particularly relevant for your region also. You need something, regional infrastructure project, regional SDG industry clusters, regional industrial collaboration, and so on. And the 4th areas of the action package is new forms of partnership for SDGs, particularly collaboration between host and home countries, enabling innovative financings and the orientation of financial markets. We need to reform financial markets. I gave you example of, for example, SS sustainable stock exchanges. And the change in the global business mindset, this is as mentioned as an example we are undertaking. Now, guiding principles. There are 4 guiding principles here. 1, we have to careful balance between regulations and liberalization. Second principles, since private sector should be involved, we need attractive risk returns for them. At the same time, we should not forget the need for accessible and affordable service for all. And we have to think the balancing between the private funds and public funds in the finance SDGs. And other times, we have to think the special case of the LDCs because they are different from the other developing countries, and the special attention should be given. These are 4 guiding principles to push the role of private sectors in the SDGs. Now, actually, the discussions, negotiating SDGs is not just only for your government, actually. Everybody can participate, everybody. There are many hubs, and we also have hubs for you to participate, particularly investment hub policies. And the investment forum, we had it already in October. This is one of the examples UNCTAD is doing, but also in other similar hubs where you can voice your opinions on the SDGs. Because so do not let your government alone handle this very important issue, because this is everybody's stake. And I hope there, so everybody should be involved in one way or another, at least understanding what's going on in New York, which becomes the mandate to you, to all of you, starting next year. And that is quite important to you also. Okay, so thank you very much. And this is first session of the 3 days. And so as we mentioned in the introduction, or also opening, we expect in the end, not the 3 days, this so workshops end. I mean, like 3 or 4 years after. I hope, so you may be, equipped enough to produce a report yourself on, the GCC investment report, for example. And this is just one of the, at this we are talking about the global level. And of course, this report is quite useful for you when you also formulate your own report, what kind of topic you may choose. Because as I mentioned to you, there are 25 annual reports, not each of them quite relevant to you still. So thank you very much. And so I don't know, what do we do? What do we do next?
Maybe we continue because at 45 we are going to go for lunch. So let's finish my presentation now.
Okay. Okay. So no need to break. We continue.
Or you want to have a... No? Okay. So good afternoon. My name is Astrid Surstarova. Some of you have seen me when I came here to launch World Investment Report. Today and for the next 3 days we are going to be together to explain mostly the concepts of FDI statistics as well as the survey. So it's going to be more, the following up of the sessions is not going to be more on a lecture type, but it's going to be more on a discussion. That's the reason that maybe in the afternoon you are going to see the tables a bit different. We are going to do a round table. We have to introduce each other as well to see where we are working, what we are doing, because this is a kind of interaction. We are sharing our experience with you, and you are going to share your experience with us. So it's, at the end of the day, this is going to be a win-win situation. But before going to the concepts of FDI statistics and what we are going to discuss later on, let me first explain to you briefly what are the FDI trends in GCC region. The results of this presentation has several, first of all, you have to know, and most of you are familiar with the data on FDI in the region, in your country and in the region. But in addition, there is another problem which we want to, at the end of the day, why you are here. If you would have best data, then we are not supposed to have a seminar on FDI statistics. We are here because we want to improve the data. So one of the points is that if you don't find some of the answers that you have for your questions for the FDI trends in the regions, comes because you don't have data. And then this is a process of improving the data at the country level and at the region level. Okay? So let me first begin with FDI inflows. By the way, I assume that most of you knows what is FDI in a statistic term. So investment, where a foreign company is investing in your country, I'm speaking in general terms, and acquire more than 10% of equity. And then all subsequent equity transaction and capital flows, they are included in FDI statistics. Now, FDI has FDI inflows and FDI stock. FDI inflows is the amount of FDI coming in a specific period. For example, this is yearly basis from 1990 to 2013. FDI stock is the accumulation of FDI in the country. It doesn't mean that FDI stock is the sum of FDI flows only. It's the sum of flows, but other components as well, what we are going to discuss in the afternoon and tomorrow. Well, this is the trend on FDI in GCC countries. What is the main characteristics that we can see here is that from the financial crisis, FDI inflows has been in a big decline. There is for the fifth consecutive year that FDI has been decreasing in the GCC countries, and of course there were reasons behind that. We try to explain it in the different World Investment Report beginning from 2010, 11, 12. So we have always covered a region, a subsection which is West Asia, and under which, of course, the main countries are GCC countries. One of the main reasons is the financial crisis. So the countries has not recovered from financial crisis, but how? What is the reason? The reason is that the main investors in GCC countries are from European countries, from developed countries. So during the financial crisis, we saw that there is a decrease of the investment from these countries, and then all the regions suffer from this decline, but including GCC countries. The problem with your region is that it didn't recover. So even some other regions, they saw a decrease in FDI inflows in 2009, in 2010, but then they began to pick up. This is not the case for the GCC countries. Of course, this is related not only to the financial crisis, but also is related to the situation, to the regional conflicts, as well as the Arab Spring. So all these factors have influenced has put a brakes into the investors to invest in your region. However, this kind of trend is different by different countries. That's the reason that I'm here. I try to look at the different countries in terms of the patterns of FDI flows. And here you see that, of course, the driving force of the countries in the GCC countries till 2009, 2008 was Saudi Arabia. And they reached a peak of 40 billion in 2008. After that, they are in a peak fall. And what's happened is that in 2013, for the first time, Saudi Arabia, we go back to the 2004, where United Arab Emirates are receiving more FDI than Saudi Arabia. The factors I mentioned for the GCC countries are basically reflecting as well the trends on FDI in Saudi Arabia, and I think here we have the colleagues from the Saudi Arabia, from Saudi Arabia, Sagia. Yes, Sagia. And then we were discussing, and you might explain a bit better what's going on in the country. And this reflects as well, there are some issues in terms of data, how much is captured and how much is not captured.
The regulations. So now it's more harder to create new investments through FDIs. The main issue that we are looking for the quality investment. So we try to close any other kind of investments. Yeah, from 2011, so that's obvious here.
Okay, so apparently we see that there is a big decline. The problem is that there were certain large projects in the GCC countries, including Saudi Arabia, that after the financial crisis that put on hold, and ailing financial banks, the banking sector in developed countries that were basically the biggest financiers of this project, they were withdrawing and they didn't put the investment. So that's the reason that not only maybe some limitations in terms of FDI in Saudi Arabia, but as well the financial banks, the banks were not willing anymore to provide the liquidity for large projects which were about to take place in GCC countries. And in fact, they were not necessarily only to the oil, but to other sectors, including the construction and many other big projects that were supposed to take place in this region, but financial crisis, they put a hold on that. Please. Sorry, you know better than me, so you could...
No, what I wanted to say, it's also true that the economies of the region are dual economies. Dual economies in the sense that they operate on the basis of two sectors. And the major sector is the oil sector. And I don't know why, and unfortunately, that over the past even 50 or whatever, 70 years, the oil sector has not been attractive for foreign direct investment. This is maybe because it's tightly controlled by the major oil companies, and they themselves are bringing all the investment. Now, the government, in the last also 40, 50 years, never made an attempt to, let's say, give the private sector a say in the development of the economy itself. And that's why, and this is what we said this morning, that foreign direct investment is attractive basically, and it is motivated and driven by making money and profit. So that's why the public sector does not provide that much incentive for the multinational corporation to come and to start businesses in these countries. And that the private sector in these countries over the past is heavily either regulated or not given an opportunity basically to compete. And that's why I always tend to believe that if these countries want to benefit from FDI, then they have to integrate FDI into their economic policies. And today we operate in a new economy, a knowledge-based economy. And these countries can be selective in the sense they can at least make choices and they can impose on these foreign companies to bring technology, manufacturing, electronics, and this is the trend as far as, let's say, development and as far as the new economy is concerned.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. So these are the comments from insiders, so from the experience that you have from your own region. But we have to mention as well that, of course, in certain sectors, FDI is quite limited. Let's say, as it was mentioned, for example, in the upstream in oil and gas. But in other sectors, in certain countries, you have quite liberalized industry, liberalized for foreign direct investment. So, for example, in Bahrain or in other countries, in services sector, in manufacturing, financial sector here.
This is also true.
Sorry.
You saw this figure this morning about the relationship between Singapore and India and China. In the last 20 years, China did a tremendous amount of liberalization. And that's why China has become much more attractive for foreign direct investment. You see, if you compare it before the 90s and before. India only recently, they began basically to make changes to make it attractive for foreign direct investment. So here, these countries, I don't think they have done enough in order to liberalize, in order to give the private sector a say, in order to be able, let's say, to reach to the multinational corporation and invite foreign direct investment into these countries. So that's...
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. So, so in terms of trends, as I mentioned to you, so you have an increase in the investment in the United Arab Emirates, which was in 2013 receiving more FDI than Saudi Arabia. But other countries as well, you have a kind of diverging trends. Of course, all the picture of GCC was driven by the declining of FDI in Saudi Arabia. But other countries, and I mentioned when I presented World Investment Report that FDI inflows in Bahrain. Bahrain is a small country, so the amount of FDI is small still. It's around 1 billion, but it was an upward trend, which is a good sign in terms of the increasing investment in the country. Well, the picture is different a bit in terms of outflows, basically investment from GCC countries abroad. Here, you don't have a kind, after financial crisis, there was a decline. Of course, in 2009, 2010, we have a decline in FDI outflows from GCC countries. But then later, the FDI outflows increased. It increased, there were some fluctuations, but still we have, in 2013, the value is around 27 or 28 billion, and it's driven by other countries, not necessarily from Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, but to other countries. And here we have the pattern, and you see that there are basically two countries. It's Kuwait, they are very large investors. I mean, they are quite around $10 billion that after the financial crisis, after 2006, you have a kind of small decline. And from 2009 onwards, they have been again around 10 billion. The investment is in different sectors. They are oil and gas companies that are investing as well abroad. You have, in addition to Kuwait, you have as well Qatar. Qatar, there was a big, you see that there is a trend of increasing trend of investment from Qatar abroad. Of course, other investors, so for example, the Saudi Arabia and Saudi Arabia has suffered. Saudi Arabia was, Saudi Arabia, no, has been on a, I have it here. So it's this line. Saudi Arabia is the blue line, and you see that there's been an increasing, but it's not it's around 5 billion compared to Qatar and Kuwait. The biggest investor has been the United Arab Emirates, but still they have the value of outward FDI is around 2 billion. Recently, you have two biggest airlines that have been aggressive in terms of acquiring certain, for example, last year we have acquisition of Air Serbia by Etihad, so you have certain merger acquisitions that took place from the companies from United Arab Emirates. Okay. Now, here we are speaking about FDI stock. As I mentioned to you, FDI stock is what is the situation of the investment in the country, and in GCC countries, inward FDI stock, it's around 400 billion. Is that a big amount? We are now in the world around 26 trillion. So the amount of FDI in the countries, the GCC region, and here, you know, GCC is including the intra, so we are including as well investment from Saudi Arabia to Qatar, or the Bahrain to Oman, so they are all the investment intra included. And you see that this is about 400 billion. You have, as I mentioned to you, the total inward FDI stock is around 26 trillion, and the potential is that, the possibility is that this inward stock could be higher. But I wanted to, something I want to mention here. I mean, if you look at the country level, the story is the same. So all the countries have an increasing FDI stock. This shows a problem in terms of collection of FDI statistics. Because we, logically, if FDI inflows is positive, then FDI stock has to be positive, has to be rising. But if you look at other countries, I'm speaking developed countries, they sometimes have a FDI stock declining, although the FDI flows is increasing. Why is the case? Because stock of FDI is not necessarily only related to the flows, how much you get in one country, but it's related as well to the value, market value. You might have in your country, if you have a foreign company, this foreign company, although might not have an investment in the country, might have a decrease in the stock market, in the value. It is not captured here. It's clearly. This is a sum of flows. So the FDI stock, when I'm going to discuss in the afternoon, has to be collected by the survey in order to reflect not only the inflows coming, the transactions, but you have to capture as well market changes, exchange rate changes, and other changes. So that's the reason that, but this is not only for GCC countries. There are many developing countries that are they don't do the survey on FDI stock, and then they end up on having a kind of upward trend all the time, FDI stock. This is not the case. You understood my point. You got my point. So the FDI stock not necessarily always is an upward trend. For example, if you look at the FDI stock of Hong Kong in 2008, half of FDI stock in Hong Kong disappeared. Half. Why? Because of the stock market. Many foreign companies which were listed in the stock market in Hong Kong, they suffered a big decline in their value. And this is, of course, reflected in FDI stock of the country. So although you don't have a decline on FDI flows, or you don't have a negative FDI flows, because only negative FDI flows can make you the stock decline, still you have a decline on FDI stock. You understood my point, but we will discuss, I will discuss, when I will discuss about the components, FDI flows, FDI stock, FDI income, we are going to discuss as well this kind of relation. But from the data, it is clear that how the data are collected in terms of FDI stock. So since I am here and you are going to make a small, can you tell me how, for example, are you collecting the data in your country? Yes, please. How you are doing the stock data?
The stock data, we make a survey every year. We collect the stock. We have a problem in the flows, as you mentioned. We can deduct this year from the last year from this year to calculate the flows. We are now developing our questionnaire with cooperation with UNCTAD also and IMF to begin calculating the flows.
Okay, so that we are going to discuss later. We have a representative from United Arab Emirates, and then we have as well, we had a discussion before from the Saudi Arabia, and we are going to discuss as well with Kuwait. So all the representatives of the country, they are going to present their methodology of collecting FDI stock and FDI flows and what are the problems. But that's what I basically found out when I looked at the trends on FDI. Okay, the same history, the same logic is about the outward. So I spoke about inward FDI stock, and then the same thing for outward FDI stock. Outward FDI stock has been increasing. It reached around 180 billion in 2013. So basically, they are investing, and here it's important to know how much of this stock is in your own country, or how much is in your own region in GCC, and how much is in other different regions. But of course, this requires, as Mr. Fujita mentioned in the morning, you have to look at the bilateral FDI statistics, and you have to know how much is the allocation of different regions and different countries. Well, here, the same, I looked at the different, the stock of outward FDI, and I saw that the largest outward investor in terms of FDI stock is United Arab Emirates, around 60 billion. In 2013, it's about outward FDI stock. But then it follows by Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. So you have basically, which are around 40 billion outward FDI stock. Now, if you, there are two types of investment, two ways an investor can come and invest in your country. Either they acquire the existing capacity, and we call it cross-border merger acquisitions, or they are creating an investment from scratch. So we call it greenfield investment. They come, they buy land, or they buy a factory which is empty, and they build an activity there, which we call it a kind of greenfield investment. Now, we are getting this kind of data from two data providers, from Thomson Reuters for M&As, and from FDI markets or Financial Times for FDI market. And then we get this kind of information. We try to see as well this is a kind of supplementary to our analysis on FDI flows. I want to mention here that the M&A is speaking about the realized value. So we know that the data are completed. The project is completed. Greenfield investment, in contrast, it's not necessarily only completed, but you have as well announced deals. So you have to be very careful when you are looking at these types of data. So you have announced and open and in progress, but you have the M&As are completed. Now, so this we have put together. From one side, we have inflows for each region, for each country, and at the end, we have the GCC as a group, and then we have cross-border M&As and greenfield FDI projects. I would really strongly advise you not to sum up M&As and greenfield to get up the FDI flows. So don't ask me why, when we sum up M&As and greenfield, we don't get FDI flows, although in some cases, some of the numbers might match. Because, first of all, greenfield M&As, although might be a cross-border, so we have a foreign company acquiring a company, let's say in Bahrain or in the United Arab Emirates, but they might raise the funds in the country. If a foreign company comes in Bahrain, and they get funds from the domestic bank in Bahrain, it's not an FDI. So although it's a cross-border M&A, you understand my point? The same thing is for greenfield, as I mentioned. This is announced deals. So for example, you have a foreign company coming in Bahrain, and they say, we are going to invest 10 billion in a project which will last 5 years. So they give the total amount, but you have to know how much, first of all, is going to be already begin the project. The second, how much is going to be spent in different years. So be careful in terms of interpreting these two types of data. But they give a good indicator of what was going to be the trend of the last, for example, for this year, these are very accessible in terms of we can have the M&A data by quarter, even by monthly. So we know how much cross-border M&A took place in December 2014. Well, for FDI, you get the data, only totals by 3 months. So there is a lag of 3 months, at least. But in other countries, you might have 6 months or more. And then if you want FDI by country or by industry, there is even 18 months lag. So we are now in December 2014, we have the data for 2012 in terms of FDI by country and by industry. So there is the kind of time lag for FDI. Well, M&A and greenfield are data that we can get it instantaneously. That's the reason we are using it as a kind of indicator. So what we can see about this kind of information we want to show. First of all, what we see from the numbers here is that there is not much of cross-border merger acquisitions taking place in GCC countries. So you don't have many private companies that are sold, not necessarily private, even public might be, that are sold to the foreign companies. You see that there is, I mean, if you see it, maximum is 5 billion, you have 3 billion. So this is basically for the whole GCC countries. Of course that you have big investment, some years, for example, last year I think, and in Kuwait was one big acquisition of a telecommunication company. This is in 2013. 2012 it was captured, it was 2 billion. And then, but what we see here from the data is that basically the data on M&A is small in absolute value. One question might be, why in Bahrain is negative? If you are interested, for example, you see that in 2013, you have a net cross-border M&A of minus 110. It means that a foreign company has divested from, so the foreign company, what's happened is that if you have, for let's say, a Japanese company coming into Bahrain in 2009, they bought a company, they have a company, Japanese company, and in 2013, they decided to sell the interest to a domestic company. And this is considered as divestment. And that's the reason that might be, for example, it's this minus 100. This is a normal, it takes place in many countries. In fact, recently developed countries, they have quite a lot of divestment. There is quite a lot of consolidation. The UK, France, Germany, they saw their M&As they have been quite negative. But you have other countries which are positive. Oman have as well in 2012 negative net cross-border M&As. The second one is Greenfield project. Now, what you can see from the Greenfield projects, and please look at the last line, because that's what I wanted to see here. You see how much is the number. It was announced, that we are speaking for announced, here is $111 billion in 2007. Only in 2007. Sorry, this was in 2008 for the GCC countries. It shows this big project that I mentioned to you before, that you know better than me, big project that were about to take place in GCC countries, and unfortunately it didn't take place because of the financial crisis. And then from then, you have a kind of decline, and in 2013, the greenfield investment were around 20 billion. It's a small number, and it shows, so basically, it shows again, so although the numbers I told you cannot be compared, the trends is clear. Even the trends in greenfield investment show kind of decrease of interest from the foreign investors to the region by the, of course, driven by the factors that I mentioned to you before. Is that this situation similar to the outflows? This is the, I'm sorry, because, yeah, this has to be, this is outflows, but there is a, so please, this is outflows, so it's not inflows. When I speak, so it's about outflows, when it's written there inflows and net cross-border merger sales, please read it as outflows and net cross-border merger acquisition purchases. And you see now, please look at the last line, what we mentioned here. You see that cross-border M&As has been bigger coming from GCC countries. It's higher than inflows. You saw that here, for example, you see that there is 7 billion, we are expecting 7 billion M&As, cross-border M&As taking place from the companies from GCC region. And the same thing is for greenfield investment. But although, again, if you compare with the peak year of 2008, the greenfield investment was 128 billion. And now has gone to 32, but it's a bit higher than 30, so there is this kind of fluctuation. In terms of the outflows, it again, net cross-border merger acquisition, as well as greenfield investment, they reflect the trends of FDI outflows. Here, we included as well inward stock in terms of numbers. As I mentioned to you, the total inward stock in GCC countries is about 400 billion. 400 billion. Of course, that's half of the inward FDI. Because if you want to measure the foreign penetration of a region, of a country, you have first to look at the stock rather than flows, because flows are quite fluctuating from one year to the other. Well, stock, it gives you what is the situation at the end of one certain period. What you see here is that we have, basically, as I mentioned to you, 400 billion. Half of it goes to Saudi Arabia, but then you have one-fourth is in United Arab Emirates, and then you have other countries in the GCC that have kind of their share in terms of FDI stock. Of course, ideally, we have to compare FDI stock not in absolute value. We have to compare with the size of the economy. That's the reason that in the annex tables of World Investment Report, we are not necessarily looking only at the FDI stock in absolute value, as I presented here, but as well as FDI stock as a share of GDP. And that's, you have to see what is the role, what is the impact of FDI in the country. So this is what we are reporting in the World Investment Report in the annex table. This is the same situation about the outward FDI stock. As I mentioned again, it's the same. I mean, this is with numbers, the table, similar to the table that, the graph that I presented earlier, that the largest share goes to, from United Arab Emirates, and then it continues with Kuwait, and then Saudi Arabia and Qatar. But so this is basically the numbers presented in the graph that I showed you before. Okay, now, after we saw about FDI flows, FDI stock, FDI flows and in total values, this is something that you are basically, this is the number that we are presenting in the World Investment Report. This you can find it in the annex tables in World Investment Report. Every time that you want to get information about your country and your region, you can get it in the World Investment Report, either in the annex tables of the report or annex tables that are in the website. So in the website, you have quite more rich information. However, we don't provide information about FDI by industry and FDI by partner in the World Investment Report. There were two reasons for that. One is about the timeliness, because the report is speaking about, the report of 2014 speaks about 2013 data. We cannot find 2013 data in the time that we prepared the report for FDI by country and FDI by industry. This is first. There are certain countries that provide this information, but we are looking at the world as a whole. And the second point is that many countries are not reporting FDI by industry and by sector. So while total FDI, every country is reporting for a simple reason. They are obliged to do it because of the FDI totals are part of balance of payments. Every central bank has to prepare balance of payments for its own country, or National Statistical Office, but mainly they are central banks. And FDI is part of balance of payments. I'm going to explain you in the afternoon how the FDI is included in the balance of payments. So they are obliged to report FDI either annually or quarterly. Some countries, there are some 30 countries in the world that they report FDI even monthly. So you can get information about total FDI flows. While this is the case for the all countries in the world, of course you have certain countries, very minor countries that have still difficulty of providing this data, total FDI, FDI by industry and FDI by bilateral FDI, they are not available for all countries. In fact, there are around 120 countries that are reporting FDI by industry for one of the components, either inflow, outflow, inward stock, or outward stock. It's much more limited, the number of the countries that are reporting for the four. But when we are now in process of publishing FDI flows by industry for the whole world, and it's around 120 countries around the world out of 210 economies, because we are looking at not only countries but as well the economies. Out of 210 economies, only 120, they are reporting FDI by industry. Now, what is the story? What is the situation in GCC countries? My colleagues has prepared the FDI inflows by sector industry. And here we saw that we have the information for Oman for 2012, but we have the information for Qatar for 2009 and Saudi Arabia for 2010. Okay, for these individual countries, what kind of information we can get? This we got it, for example, for Saudi Arabia, we got it from SAGIA, the information, and from Qatar, we got from the central bank, I think. So from United Arab Emirates, we got it from National Statistical Office. It's National Statistical Office that is collecting the FDI data. And what we can see out of this FDI flows, we can see that, for example, for Saudi Arabia, the largest part of FDI inflows in Saudi Arabia, inflows for 2010, it goes to the service sector. Mainly, it is in business activities as well as in construction. This is how the FDI flows in 2010 is distributed. The FDI in the primary sector is quite limited. Of course, as we mentioned, the primary sector, the oil, gas, is very, it's not allowed, I mean, it's very, very limited for foreign companies to come and to invest in the upstream sector. What about the other two countries, Qatar and Oman? We see that again, for Qatar, the largest part of investment, in fact, is in secondary, in manufacturing. But we don't know, they don't explain which are the sectors, industries that are receiving FDI. So we know only that out of basically 60% of 8 billion in Qatar in 2009 went to the manufacturing sector. Yes, sorry. Yeah, sorry. In Oman, the situation is different because, again, the services sector is the highest one, the biggest one, but then you have certain investment in oil and gas, in mining, quarrying, and petrol, which is about half of $563 million. We are speaking this for inflows. This is United Arab Emirates, and I have a problem in terms of data here, if you can, because it's too big in terms of the by sector. It's 73 billion, while I just mentioned to the totals in 2012 or 2003 was around 8 billion. What is this difference? Why you have this difference by industry and by sector? Can you or?
This figures from the survey.
It comes from the survey.
Yes. The 73. But the 1 billion and 5
Yes.
is from UNCTAD.
But we got the data from you. So I think with the United Arab Emirates we had to, we got the data. I mean, our procedure of collecting the data and reporting the data is we are asking the countries to verify the numbers that we have. So I think we asked and we verified your institution. I think it was either Central Bank or National Statistical Office, but one institution that is responsible for collecting FDI statistics, and they confirmed. So there was some, basically, there are two institutions in your country that are collecting FDI statistics? Is that true, or? There are two institutions, or only one institution?
No, one institution. Before the central bank was provide you the figures.
Yes.
After that, I think they make a decision who I don't know. That National Bureau will provide you the figures.
Okay.
Before 1 month, we sat together with Ministry of Economic to discuss the same thing. Yes, and the idea is we must sit with you, UNCTAD, to make one figure.
Okay. Excellent. I think this is the purpose of the workshop. We want to have one figure by the countries, but you are not the only country. Eh? I have to say you that even till now, in another country, it's a big country, Russian Federation, you have two institutions, two state institutions, Central Bank, National Statistical Office, report two different numbers. And the purpose of the workshop is just to unify these institutions in order to, in terms of methodology, to work together, because as Mr. Fujita mentioned in the morning, FDI is not a number that belongs to one institution, it's of the country. That's the reason that we would like to, this is basically, please.
Yeah. What I wanted to say here, and I think this is a question also to you, I think when it comes to foreign direct investment, we need to we need to distinguish between numbers, because sometimes number could deceive, and between the productivity of the foreign direct investment. The ultimate impact of foreign direct investment is its contribution to the national economy in terms of the GDP. Now, if you look, for example, at the United Arab Emirates, they have probably a large amount of foreign direct investment. But I think there has been a criticism recently for United Arab Emirates because most of that investment is going to the real estate. And the real estate is the least productive sectors in the economy when it comes, let's say, to adding value to the GDP. So here we are speaking about numbers, and we are speaking about GDP and the contributions of, let's say, FDI. Now, from a development point of view, and then the whole purpose of FDI is the benefit that will come to the country.
Right.
And the benefit in terms of employment, the benefit in terms of income, and today in terms of knowledge, in terms of information, in terms of technology transfer. These are all important components. So anybody who is interested in foreign direct investment, first and foremost, they have to think along these lines in order to create a viable economy based on, let's say, manufacturing, electronic, in order to be able to compete. Most of these countries, they have very little amount of foreign direct. The number may sound big, but in terms of their contribution to productivity is very little. And again, is what I said before, because of the duality of the economic structure.
Yes.
Everything is invested in the oil. Nothing is basically left for the private sector to contribute. And that's the weakness of foreign direct investment in these kind of, let's say, countries. Now, I also wanted to ask you a question, because you are involved in these FDI. You look at these countries here in the region. They have more money than anybody else in the world. But why, for example, with all this money that they have, they are not being able to invest enough? And on the other hand, they have not been able to attract foreign direct investment. Foreign direct investment in the region probably is the lowest among all the regions in the world. That's where the problem.
You see, we don't have data of FDI inflows by country for Bahrain. What we did, we went to mirror countries, to investing countries, and we found out these are the countries that are reporting FDI to Bahrain, outward FDI from them to Bahrain. And you see it's very small, but this is what the countries, United States, for example, is reporting 101 million in 2011 investment in Bahrain. You have Japan. Japan is basically investing 261 million in 2000. It's even, in fact, if you look at the numbers, the investment from Japan in 1 year is the biggest one. But we don't know if this is reflect all, you know? You don't have, for example, here, you don't have what? You don't have Saudi Arabia. And you know that Saudi Arabia is one of the biggest investors in the country. So this is not reported. But this is only for inflows. If you go down, voila. This is FDI flows abroad. FDI flows abroad, again, is mirrored, based on mirror data. So the countries, they are reporting. And you see here that the biggest recipient, for example, recently, you have Egypt, 145 million, and you have Pakistan, no, this is Oman, 120 million. See, this is as reported by their recipient countries. But then, apparently, here, Bahrain prepared FDI inflows inward stock. This is FDI inward stock, and you have it from 2009 to 2012. This is the data that I reported as well in IMF. IMF reports FDI stock, only FDI stock, and these are basically reported to IMF. And you see here, out of 16 billion out inward FDI stock to the country, the biggest investor, of course, they are developing countries, so they are mainly developing countries, 15 billion, and you see that you have, basically, their biggest investor is Kuwait with 5 billion. You have Saudi Arabia with 4 billion. And these are basically, and then you have United Arab Emirates with 1 billion. These are basically the biggest investors that are in Bahrain. And you have some which is unspecified. Okay? And finally, this is the data that comes from Central Bank or from Statistical Office of Bahrain, because there we use even by region. We didn't use the mirror data. And finally, you have outward FDI stock, FDI stock abroad. Again, Bahrain, it doesn't report. So now I went one case, I took the case of Bahrain, but the story is similar to other countries. Suppose that I will go to Oman. Okay. Oman, it reports FDI flows. It reports FDI flows into the country. And you see that out of 1 billion they got in 2011, they have investment from different, they have from European Union, for example, United Kingdom is one big investment, 784 million is the investment in 2011. But this is not the case for inward, for outward. They report as well. Oman report as well FDI outflows by country. By the Central Bank of Oman, they report FDI outflows, and you see that out of their investment, 1.2 billion, the biggest one still is unspecified, but then you have some investment that goes to United Arab Emirates, as well as some investment that go to Egypt. Is that? No, it's, the biggest one is the United Arab Emirates, and the biggest one is the unspecified. What about the FDI stock? Oman FDI stock, they report as well FDI stock. So the Central Bank of Oman apparently report as well FDI stock by country, and they have 15 billion, out of which half and half, they basically share, they have 7 billion coming from developed countries, and mainly it is, I see that the biggest investor in Oman is the United Kingdom. And then half of it goes from, it's from developing countries. And then, of course, the biggest one is United Arab Emirates. And they have as well a part for unspecified. Well, I got an example of a country that apparently report all FDI inflows, FDI outflows, FDI inward stock and outward stock. They report by country. They have this kind of information. Of course, it finished at, its end at 2011, but apparently they report outward FDI stock. So this is an example that basically the 4 components, they are reported by country, by Oman. But what is the situation, for example, then in Saudi Arabia? And then we have Saudi Arabia. They report FDI flows by, the data comes from SAGIA. They report FDI flows by country and inflows. And here you have the biggest investor in Saudi Arabia is, they are developed countries. But the numbers are referring to only 2010. This is the latest number that we have. You don't have any survey? We are working down to 2014. Okay, because okay, FDI flows abroad, Saudi Arabia doesn't report by country. So you see here now, as I don't report by region, you see that basically these are the FDI flows by country, by the reporting country, and you see this is basically the from mirror data. The same thing if you go to FDI inward stock, they do report but they don't report. So basically you apparently report inward FDI, but you don't report outward FDI by country. So you see that there are, in different countries, they report different types of bilateral FDI statistics. It's important for the region as a whole to capture all these bilateral FDI inflows and outflows, because if you want to measure the intra FDI between your countries of the region, then you have to have this kind of information, bilateral FDI inflows and FDI outflows. I just want to mention an example. In ASEAN, in Asia, they are able even to report two-dimensional data. So we prepared a report which is called ASEAN Investment Report. And if you can see in the report that they are able to show, for example, investment between two ASEAN countries, Indonesia, let's say, with Malaysia, and in which industries? Not only the total, but as well as the industries. So this is we call it two-dimensional tables. So this has been from earlier, in 1997 and 2000, UNCTAD has worked with ASEAN in order to improve FDI statistics, and I think that this might be as well the way for GCC countries to improve their FDI data and to be able to make a proper analysis in terms of FDI. Okay, so this is basically the presentation about the FDI data. It shows clearly what is some of the strength in terms of some stories that you can get out of FDI statistics, but what is important is the weaknesses of collecting of FDI data. And as I mentioned to you, in order to have better policies, you have to have better data. This is what we are for now. So with that, we go for lunch, and then we come back and discuss the concepts on FDI statistics and why they're important. Thank you very much.